Welcome to 3 in the News. 3 in the News. A podcast for educators by educators. Brought to you by the Los Angeles Institute for Restorative Practices and Research, the authority on restorative practices in K-12 education.
Hey everybody, welcome to 3 in the News. The structure of the podcast is simple. During every episode, we will analyze and discuss 3 dominant news stories appearing in K-12 news. Everything from teacher pay, cell phones, bullying, school policy, school politics, discipline, attendance, and much, much more. I'm excited to jump in today with my co-host, Candice Dagnino, because Carlos is in Greece, I guess on vacation. I don't know. What have you heard, Candice?
Well, I'm sure he's living it up, but I know that he's definitely doing the work to further expand our influence. The work of the Los Angeles Institute for Restorative Practices is making its way across the seas and into Greece. We're actually going to be out there next year for an international conference.
Yeah.
He's setting the foundation for that work and probably living it up a little bit too, not going to lie. So yeah, it's the dynamic duo that you've got today. I'm so happy to be here with you and to get into these conversations. You've brought forth some really interesting topics, and I think that there's a lot to be said about it.
And I'm excited to jump in with you.
Yeah, it's a blessing. I have to say, I have to count my blessings because, listen, like it's taken a lot of work to get our school to the place where I can, as a principal, sit in and have this conversation. This work as school leaders is so important. Staying educated, staying on top of, what is important so that you can get in front of your team, get in front of your families and your students, so that you are best prepared in that, right? And oftentimes we're putting out fires, and I'm just so thankful that I have such a solid team of educators who are handling it. So for the most part, I'm confident, but you just never know. It's also the nature of a school to have these things come up that just need your immediate attention. So we'll see. We got about 30 more minutes, but I'm hopeful and I'm excited to be in this conversation now.
All right, awesome. And so I'm going to jump right in with our first news story that comes from an NPR affiliate in DeKalb County in Georgia, where a 15-year-old Micah Keene, a sophomore football player at Arabia Mountain High School, tragically passed away after a medical emergency on July 22nd, 2025. Remembered as an energetic, compassionate, and joyful kid, Micah was more than an athlete. He was a spark in the school community. The school, as a result of Micah's death, canceled the football activities, offered grief counseling to students and staff, and urged the focus to remain on honoring Micah's life and on supporting each other during this difficult time. And, this story really touches on something that's almost never talked about in education, and it's the loss of somebody from the educational community, whether it's a student or a teacher. Candice, can you talk a little bit about that? What have you faced something like this in your school community, something similar to what Arabia Mountain High School is facing? And what would you do as an administrator there?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's often not talked about, even though I think we face crisis after crisis, and, schools do their best to pick up the pieces to support their communities in the healing process. And I think that's the key to all of this, is that there is a real role and responsibility of the institution to come together in this moment of crisis. I am so thankful. I've never had to experience this in the years that I've been I've served as a principal. Heartbreakingly, I did lose one of my founding students when I, had the privilege of working in Dallas, and not by this way, but I think the loss of a kid in any sense was the absolute worst thing an educator can experience, because we pour our hearts and our souls into this work for the sake of our kids, and when we lose a kid, it is the absolute worst thing. They by nature become like our own, and they never will be. And I think that we still have such a responsibility to the families that we serve, and the community is impacted. I think it's really about navigating uncertainty that really allows kids to feel safe, that they have a place to process, and that families can reflect on what the experience is, but also how do we come together in these moments of greatest need for the family most impacted, but also for the greater community.
Yeah, because the principal in that sense can't do it alone or shouldn't be expected to do it alone, or anybody from the community, because the principal themselves is grieving. And it's really tough, when you're going through something, to try to lift others out of something.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, the principals, I think they're like, I'm just going to put on a strong face, or I'm going to, plow through this. And I don't know that that's healthy for others, because, when you grieve, you give others permission to grieve. And if you're sad, it almost s- putting on a strong face disservices the community in terms of, you know, how people should grieve. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to express that. And I think kids will take more from it if you're honest.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you touched on such an important factor, right? Like we always say at LARP that this is very much a business we're in the business of people. And
Mhm.
to be effective in this work, we have to really see people and understand people. And when we pretend that these feelings aren't surfacing for us, so that they don't impact us in the same way, you're right. I think that there's a real missed opportunity to give other people the opportunity to do the same.
Yeah.
I think though so often our work demands of us this layer of strength that really does pull our community through, and I commend the school for doing what they've done in terms of taking a real proactive approach. And often you asked, what I would do. I think what I've seen effective organizations and communities do is allow the community, the most immediately impacted community, to grieve, to process by bringing in other professionals who can support the processing. So
Yeah.
it may not be the counselors that are on campus, because they too are grieving and
Yeah.
helping process. Maybe we need to bring in counselors from other schools within the same district. We need to bring in other adults who can really be prepared to support the work of both the adults and the young people and the families who are being affected by it all.
And I have kind of a unique story, because I was a brand new teacher. I started teaching in Carson, California, and there was an older teacher there who had been in the community around 30 years, and I was brand new, and we were eating lunch. I remember his name was Mr. Flutie, and I said, Mr. Flutie, like, have you ever had a student die? And he said, I've been to about 10 funerals.
Oh,
And at that point in the beginning of my teaching career, that just seemed like, whoa, like that's insane. And now here in my 23rd year, I've been to about 8 myself.
oh, good.
And students that have passed away while I've been a principal, while I've been a teacher, and it's tough. And my heart goes out to this school, Arabia Mountain High School, because any plans that they had for the year, and how much you work to set up the school year to have success. An unfortunate or untimely death derails anything, as it should. I mean, it's so hard to keep plowing through all these plans, but I mean, it just shows you how fragile, like, the stability of a year is. All these problems that we think we have, like, this is the biggest problem we can have.
Yeah. No, and I'm so sorry that you've experienced that. And I do believe, that so many educators, so many leaders in education will often process these experiences or carry them with them, and often silently. There's so much that leaders carry. And I truly believe that this is the heaviest thing that educators can live with, because, we do hard work, but there's
Yeah.
so much hope and beacon of energy of light and hope in the kids that we see and serve every day. And so when that is literally cut short, when that light is just dimmed, I mean, that is the hardest part of this work, because you have so much hope for the potential for this young person's life and all that they will be, and to not see that come to fruition, and then to also create space for the community to process, do all of the other more technical things while trying to center a very human experience. It's such a heavy weight and such a burden to carry. But I do think that there's a lot to learn from these experiences. And we were talking about this earlier, and how these are the situations that you're not often given the playbook for. You're given the playbook for managing communication and managing the technical part of the work, but often it's missed. And like, how do we manage the trauma, the emotional impact, the psychological impact of that? And you carry that for, I'm sure, the rest of your life.
Yeah, and if you are a career educator, this will happen. And that is the truth of it. If you are in education long enough, this will happen. And it's a scary thought. And I don't say that lightly, but it tells you like how unprepared we are, because it's never talked about in the undergraduate program. I've taken, more education classes than I want to share, but it's never been a topic. And I'm not saying that they should bring it up and talk about death and all this, but I mean, they need to talk about these kind of impossible situations that don't have a playbook. And I think because we are going to face them either way. So, Candace, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll move to the last second story.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's really about coupling both like the action one has to take with this remembering of just compassionate leadership and servitude. There's very rarely is there any getting it right, because how do you get that right? Because you can't ever make up that loss ever. So there's always going to be this void. But I think just patience with oneself and being perhaps proactive and thinking through just what are the things that we can put in place well in advance of any, crisis of this degree. What can we plan for in advance? Because just like I think the grieving process for any death that we experience as human beings, it is not during the peak grief period that you want to be, preparing for the celebrations of life and preparing for the funerals and doing all these things that are so surreal.
And they're draining. They're draining on your energy, and you have none at that moment.
Exactly. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of doing what we can in advance of these situations and hoping that we never have to enact these plans, but being prepared is probably the best thing that we can do, especially in support of those who are directly and most impacted, being the families.
Yeah, thank you so much, Candace. And our second story comes from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, by way of Public Source Media. This article's a bit thick, so I'll do my best to summarize it. Here goes. Despite efforts to shift towards restorative discipline, Pittsburgh public schools have returned to pre-pandemic suspension levels with stark racial disparities. Between 2018 and 2024, students received more than 18,000 suspensions, and Black students, just over half the district's population, accounted for nearly 90% of them. This trend is especially troubling for Black students with individualized education programs, often referred to as IEPs. As African American students with special needs, they are more likely to get suspended than before the pandemic, while Black girls with IEPs were suspended at twice the previous rate. So, Candace, I want to ask you here, what are some of the challenges of, as Pittsburgh Public Schools is trying to move from these kind of punitive measures, 18,000 suspensions, to restorative practices? What are some of the challenges that you've had, taking your staff through that continuum?
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted. There are so many. And the first one is really holding up the mirror and being honest about what is the reality here. What is the state of the union? Clearly, this is a problem, right? Yeah. This is very much a systemic issue, because we are further disenfranchising communities, specifically Black boys and Black communities who have historically been, I think, marginalized and overlooked. I think that there's a real huge step and responsibility in recognizing that is an organizational issue. That is an us problem, because there is no way that you can sit here and say that is just to be expected, because absolutely not. I think that there's the first step of recognizing that there's an issue, and then being ready, I think getting ready to really face those matters head on. And I'll say the other challenge too, especially when we start to talk about restorative practices.
Yeah.
There have been so many conversations in which restorative practices get such a bad rep, often being tokened as this like feel good, give your kid a pat on the back and hope that they don't do the thing again.
That you sit on beanbags and share candy.
Exactly. We give out candy and go back to class and all will be well. But that's not at all it. I do think, though, that the reason it can often be given this reputation is because restorative practices takes a long time to really see effect, to impact, right? When you think about relationships, because restorative practices are all seated around relationships first.
Yeah.
You just create relationships organically and they just happen within a snap of fingers. It really is commitment, it's time, it's genuine connection, it's effort, it's intention behind these moments where we're starting to build these places of trust and connection with our kids and our families. And if we're not doing that, we're not really getting to know who the people are that we're in service to. We are setting ourselves up to be in these positions, right? I really wonder just, what is the work after we start to unpack these disparities? Because it's absolutely an inequity.
And Candace, sorry to cut you off there, but I think, they talk about there's almost 19,000 students in this district, and that they have tried to shift to restorative practice. But one of the challenges, and I'll put it there, suspensions are easier, they're quicker. Restorative practice, not only does it take time to evolve, or many years, but the process of holding restorative meetings is time consuming. There would be times that I would sit in, 45 minutes talking about, how a kid texted another kid and how they could make up and fix that. And it was 45 minutes. And because it takes time to really have kids speak their mind, feel like they're being heard, and come up with resolutions. The quickest thing is to say, you know what, you're suspended, you did wrong, you're out. And so I get it that it's quicker. And so as the school is making the transition towards restorative practice, I wonder, how equipped they were for the amount of time that it takes to do restorative practice well.
Yeah, or the level of patience that anyone is putting in, right? But I think that the bigger question is, are we understanding, right? Absolutely, you're right. This takes a lot of time, right? But when you think about it on the grander scheme of things, what is 45 minutes to a lifetime of inaccess, a lifetime of a completely shifted trajectory in your life choices because the school that was set up to serve you didn't, or provided a major disservice to you and your family, such that now you are in a system that very much mirrors the national patterns where exclusionary discipline intersects with race and disability bias. And we see this, there's lots of talk of the school to prison pipeline implications, right? I think that when we consider the amount of work it's going to take to address a matter in a way that, yes, will be more time consuming, but perhaps long term will have a very different impact, I think we have to consider the return on our investment. And talk about servitude. That is what being in service to kids and to families is. Of course, it's easy to suspend kids. Of course, it's because it does right by who? The adult, right? It's better for us, but it is absolutely detrimental to the lives of our kids. And that's ultimately what we're in service to.
Yeah. And I just wonder, the schools try to move to restorative practices, they might not hire more staff to do the process of restoring, not realizing that it is more time consuming, that it's going to take a lot of resources, and the most precious one is time. And so I just wonder, as schools embark on this journey of shifting from punitive measures to restorative practices, if they realize how much time they're going to have to invest in this. And one of the things that Carlos and I, we've been working on is the idea of zero tolerance policies, this idea that, you mess up and there's already a prescribed punishment for you. You did X, so you get Y. You did, Z, you get A. And that makes people feel comfortable, but we work in nuance. And there's no way to ever come up with pre-prescribed measures. And the final thing there is, as we moved away from zero tolerance and suspensions and all this, we started to see that they weren't working. They weren't really working. They might have made the adults feel better, or made people feel like you're doing something because you have these large number of suspensions. But when you take away the facade and you look deep and you look under the hood, so to speak, the car was broken.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely right. And you think about what are our kids doing when they're not in school, right? If we're suspending them and parents are working, like what are they actually learning? Aside from, great, I needed a break from the teacher too.
Yeah.
Like, what exactly, they're coming back with more frustration, more resentment, and more of this internalized idea that school is not for me, that I have been told that this is not my place. And I do think that, schools have to consider, leadership has to consider like the continued impact of suspension, because yes, there's loss of instruction, but there are such greater ripple effects that are happening within that one child. And then what does that do for the greater system? Are we building out experiences where our young people are able to truly learn from their mistakes? Because our work is in discipline. Discipline, when we get at the root of the word, is to teach. It is not punitive. It is not meant to further traumatize, further hurt, and inhibit young people from accessing their life goals and dreams and doing the work that they want to do. And if we're at the point as educators where it's easier for us to do that, then we need to reevaluate this work. We reevaluate the systems that we're in, because ultimately most of us didn't get into this work to do that. And I hope that that's not why educators are doing this work.
No, right? And I think I need, one of the things of the article pointed out the racial makeup of the staff versus the students that are being served, where some of the schools are 90% white. And in that school, the majority of the suspensions are Black students.
Yep.
And, what have you seen, or this is obviously this podcast is only 30 minutes, but, if we can talk about the importance of having a staff that mirrors the demographics you serve, or at least focuses on building relationships with that, with those students. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's more than just representation, because it absolutely matters, right? I think that it's so important that our kids can see themselves in the people that are leading them, that are teaching them. I also think it's important that there are adults who are willing to take the courage to teach kids how to question authority in ways that are productive and helpful, and how to really think critically about what is being done with them, because it shouldn't be done to them, right? This is about educating our kids to be well-rounded individuals. And when they don't see themselves, when they don't feel that, I think it's especially difficult for them to trust the people that are really charged with the responsibility of leading them. I also think that, when we talk about race, I think we have to consider this aspect of racism and implicit bias, and these ways in which we've been conditioned will absolutely surface. They're going to manifest regardless of whether or not we intend to be the greatest educators that are, have this lens of equity. We have to constantly do the work to check with ourselves and understand the impact that we're having. Representation matters. There needs to be diversity. And, research shows often that, there's this misconception before I get there. There's this misconception that oftentimes that, that people are racist because they're not bringing in folks, or they're not catering to folks that are different from them. I think, yes, that there's some truth to that. Really, it's about affinity. Our brains are wired to look for similarities and likeness. And so oftentimes these biases will surface because when you think about organizations that have leadership that are predominantly white, they tend to hire more white people, not because they're excluding people of color, but because they prefer or have an affinity to white people. Yeah. And that's often when you're going to see the same thing with people of color.
Wait, and so you mean it's not a merit-based system? Because I thought I always had an equal chance everywhere.
I mean, let's be real. So many of our systems are still caught up with so much work to do. I mean, just look at, what we're seeing across the country with just the disparities in the disproportionate rates of suspension. I think that we need to really think about, are we getting the training, the learning? To your point, are we really engaging in wanting to know who our kids are, right? Instead of just believing that that's just how they are, because no one is just any way. Like, we have to do the work to truly build our empathy as servant leaders.
Yeah, and I cut you off, and you were going off on a beautiful thought about the affinity of like how we tend to kind of gravitate towards our own kind in a way, or people that look like us and sound like us. The article does talk about a little the importance of relationships, and how, no matter what you do, you can't manufacture relationships. You either have them or you don't. And that the school is focusing on, okay, well, let's work on building these relationships. So it's not necessarily that a white person can't teach a brown kid, or a white person can't teach an African-American kid, or anything like that. It's about taking the time to build those relationships. Yep. And in the absence of those relationships, race becomes a big factor. It can become a factor, like you're talking with implicit bias, and how, I already think I know you, and so you have to dig deeper and evaluate yourself. So I agree with that 100%. And I'll give you the last word on this, and then we're going to move on to the final one. We only have about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I ultimately just want to invite our listeners to really see beyond the statistics. I think that there's a real need for us to investigate the impact of the suspensions. It's really the student first, understanding the human being behind these barriers and the decisions that are shaping their futures. And the last point that I'll make about this is, we have to urge ourselves as educators. We have to have a real sense of urgency behind the work that it takes to truly understand how racism is manifesting in our classrooms, in our buildings. And a lot of educators do not want to touch that conversation with a 10-foot pole. And we got to get beyond that, because if you're in this work of people, especially people who are different than us, or people who are, if we're serving in communities of color, we need to do this work more critically than anyone else.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Our third article and our final article today comes from an online website aimed at supporting parents. The name of the website? Parents. Common Sense Media has launched a new digital literacy and wellness curriculum for K-8 students. It was first updated in 2018 with nearly 150 lessons on AI, screen time, online safety, and critical thinking. It offers flexible mini lessons, family resources, and teacher training. Schools have used the old version for many years and are now transitioning to the new version. Many parents, however, feel that the new version is already outdated. That's because technology is moving at lightning speed. And one of the things with this curriculum here is the rollout of something new. Teachers are now being told, hey, you have to work on digital literacy, and you have to work on AI and screen time. And can you talk a little bit about that, Candace? Like, how do those issues are important. Obviously, our first job is the job of educating students in the subject that we're teaching, things like that. But how do you make room for these things that are equally important?
I think, again, I think it's interesting. Just our podcast feels a little bit of like we're all over the place, but it's so representative of how we work and how we operate, and also how we have to manage so many critical but yet competing priorities. And this is yet another one. We are charged with the responsibility of staying on top of our game. I think the first misstep is, and similarly to the previous article, when someone says, well, I'm not here to do the work of race. I'm not here to do the work of understanding SEL and restorative practices. No, you are, though, because as an educator now, you have to be committed in the same way that you're committed to being a content expert. You have to be committed to doing this work of people, and similarly have to be committed to developing your skill set around technology or new curriculum. And I think the only constant in our field is that it is so I wouldn't say inconsistent, I guess, because I think the only constant is change.
Constantly changing. That's it. Yeah.
That's the only constant, right? Is that you have to expect. And I think oftentimes, we face these changes with this lens of fear, because, often changes feels like a matter of loss. You're used to one thing, and now you got to figure out this new thing. And there's a loss of time. There's a loss of consistency and certainty. But, we find more often than not, these things are for our best. They're for the better education of our young people. Do you remember the uproar that was like the paperless classroom and the internet? And we grew up in the 1900s. We were at the turn of the millennium rather. We I think got all of the fear mongering in the classrooms, and always for the best. Could you imagine?
I had a smart board in my room. I was one of the first teachers to get a smart board. And I had to go to this Saturday training because it was so specialized. And, I remember people being like, oh, can we see your smartboard? And I worked in a portable. And here's the thing about it. The smartboard had to be calibrated. So if you moved it, then you clicked on something and it was not calibrated. And And I worked in a portable where every time a student walked, it moved. And so it was like a terrible idea, but I was like always turning that thing on, like calibrating it 50 times a day. But it was just.
I'm so sorry to cut you off, but
no. It's just because I was trying something new and I wanted to be part of this tech. Now I would never in my life sign up to work with a smart board.
Right. Well, and I think because things become like they've stated, I mean, right now we're currently working through a system that's giving us quite a few hiccups, but we do believe it's for the best. It's going to digitize, movements and hall passes and data tracking. And we are literally in like stage 1 and there's just technical snafus, but when we move beyond that, when we're able to be gritty in terms of like moving through the discomfort of change, I do think that it opens up doors for a whole new set of possibilities. And perhaps, realistically in 5 years, this new digital curriculum will not be all the rage rather than like it's not going to be as impactful because something new and perhaps better is going to come through. I think we just got to stay open in terms of like understanding education is empowering.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that central point that you brought up. We are teaching more than just our subject areas. And so right now we have to work on digital literacy. It's the life of every kid right now. Back when I was in elementary, I was in the DARE program, drug abuse resistance education. And so, that was the big thing there. Like they had to do it. Like my teacher had to stop and talk to us about drugs and you can't just say, well, no, you know what? I'm only a history teacher, so you can't ask me to do this thing. We're teachers of kids and we're teachers of people. And so I really, I agree 100%. So Candace, it's just you and me. You were worried at the very beginning that, hey, are you going to talk? Because it's just you and me. And I'm doing a hard stop at 31 minutes here.
Yes, because it is dismissal. I got to get back out there with my kids. It's been a pleasure. I'm glad that we were able to connect and talk. I know that we go through 3 very, I think, riveting and perhaps controversial topics. But I think it just leaves our listeners wanting more. And if they do want more, I highly encourage them to check out our website at larp.org. I think it's important that you all check out TNARC that's coming up in November. Early November, you can grab your tickets now. We want to make sure that you are part of the conversation too. We want to meet you, come through. We're going to be in Downey, and we are excited to continue all of these conversations and more.
And Candace, to put you on the spot, because that's what I specialize in, leave us with the thought of the week.
Yeah, I look forward to this and I also dread it, but really I hope that our listeners, especially our current educators and aspiring educators, will remember that we are always at the root of this work in service to people first. And it's important that if you are thinking about getting into education, that you recognize that it is not one thing. It's not ever just teaching. It's not ever just anything. There are so many things. And honestly, I think that's the beauty of this work, is that we get to impact lives in so many ways. And we have such a responsibility to do that work. And, I invite all of you who are open and willing to do the real hard work, which is checking in with yourself first and making sure that this is what your calling is, and that you want to do this for young people more than anything. So I'll leave them with that.
All right, Candace. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to 3 in the News. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Music. We're now on YouTube and Amazon Music. Be sure to follow us to get notifications on new episodes. Thank you, Candace, for giving up your time, and hope everybody has a great weekend. Bye, everybody.